I've always hated being late. Punctuality was a virtue my father instilled in me, and at 68, those lessons still run deep. So when my son Michael called this morning with his cheerful, "See you at dinner, Mom?" I made sure to arrive 15 minutes early, despite the ache in my knees from yesterday's gardening. The drive to Westfield, New Jersey from my small apartment in Elizabeth takes about 20 minutes on a good day. I'd moved there after selling the family home following Richard's death 3 years ago. Downsizing, they call it. I call it surrendering to the inevitable march of time. Before continuing with the story, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are watching from. Your help is very important. Spring had finally broken through after a harsh winter. Cherry blossoms lined the streets of Michael's suburban neighborhood, their pink petals catching in the gentle April breeze. I parked my 12-year-old Camry in front of the imposing colonial house my son and his wife had purchased last year, the one I'd only visited twice before. A house paid for, in part, with money from Richard's life insurance, money I'd insisted Michael take to establish his family properly. "It's what your father would have wanted," I'd told him. Though in truth, Richard and I had never discussed such matters. We'd been too busy living, working, raising our son. Too busy assuming we had more time. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, applying a fresh coat of coral lipstick, the same shade I'd worn for 40 years. The lines around my mouth had deepened since Richard's passing, mapping the journey of my grief. I smoothed my silver hair, cut in a practical bob that required minimal maintenance, and straightened the collar of my blue blouse. Michael's favorite color on me. The dinner was significant. After months of subtle hints and gentle nudging, I'd finally convinced Michael to invite me to meet his in-laws. In the 5 years he'd been married to Vanessa, I'd only encountered her parents at the wedding, a whirlwind event where meaningful conversation had been impossible. Tonight would be different. Tonight was about family connecting, about building bridges. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd splurged on, a Napa Valley Cabernet that had stretched my fixed income, and the homemade apple pie cooling on the passenger seat. My mother's recipe, the one Michael had grown up loving, the one that had earned me a blue ribbon at the county fair back in '87. The front walkway was lined with solar-powered lanterns that had already begun to glow in the fading daylight. I noticed the garden had been recently tended. Vanessa's work, no doubt. From what Michael told me, she was quite the horticulturist, though she'd never accepted my offers to garden together. I rang the doorbell, my heart quickening like a schoolgirl's. It had been too long since I'd seen my son. Phone calls and occasional texts couldn't replace the warmth of his smile, so much like his father's. The door swung open, and there stood Michael, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway. At 38, his dark hair had begun retreating from his forehead, another trait inherited from Richard. "Mom." His smile seemed genuine, though something in his eyes, a flicker of, what? Apprehension? Gave me pause. "You're early." "Better early than late," I offered my standard response, leaning in for a hug. His embrace was brief, one-armed, his body angled away from mine. Not the bear hugs of his youth or even the respectful embraces of his adulthood. Something was off. Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Everyone's in the living room." I entered the foyer, noting the gleaming hardwood floors and the abstract artwork adorning the walls, pieces I didn't recognize from Michael's previous home. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic, undercut by the chemical sweetness of a plug-in air freshener. "I brought pie," I said, raising the container slightly, "and a bottle of Cabernet. I remember Vanessa mentioning she enjoys red wine." "Thanks, Mom." Michael took the items, placing them on a side table rather than bringing them to the kitchen. "Let me take your coat." As I slipped off my light spring jacket, I heard voices from the adjacent room, the bright, slightly high-pitched tones of Vanessa, the deeper rumble of what must be her father. Laughter erupted, cutting off abruptly as Michael called out, "Look who's here!" I smoothed my slacks, took a deep breath, and followed my son into the living room. 4 faces turned toward me. Vanessa, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, sat perched on the arm of a leather sofa. Beside her, a silver-haired couple I recognized as her parents, Edward and Margaret Wilson. And in an armchair near the fireplace, a young woman I didn't recognize, perhaps in her early 30s, with Vanessa's eyes and a polite smile. "Hello, everyone," I said, summoning warmth into my voice. "It's lovely to see you again, Edward, Margaret." Edward rose, crossing the room with his hand extended. Elaine, good to see you. It's been too long. His handshake was firm, businesslike. Margaret offered a wave from the couch, not bothering to stand. Elaine, you look well. Mom, Michael interjected. This is Vanessa's sister, Claire. She's visiting from Boston. The young woman stood, approaching with a genuine smile. Mrs. Scott, I've heard so much about you. Have you? I wanted to ask. Because I've heard nothing about you. Instead, I clasped her offered hand. Please, call me Elaine. Lovely to meet you, Claire. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, an heirloom from Vanessa's family, judging by the ornate craftsmanship. Can I get you something to drink, Elaine? Vanessa finally asked, rising from her perch. We have sparkling water, wine, or Edward brought some excellent scotch. Water would be fine for now, thank you. I'd save the wine for dinner when perhaps the atmosphere might warm. Michael gestured to an empty chair positioned slightly apart from the main seating arrangement. Have a seat, Mom. We were just talking about Claire's new position at Massachusetts General. I settled into the chair, noting its stiffness compared to the plush sofa where the others sat. Are you a doctor, Claire? I asked, genuinely interested. A neurologist, she replied. I just completed my fellowship in movement disorders. How fascinating, I said. I worked as a nurse for 35 years before retiring, mostly in geriatrics, but we often had patients with Parkinson's and similar conditions. Mom was head nurse at Elizabeth General, Michael added, a hint of pride in his voice that warmed me. That must have been rewarding work, Margaret commented, though her tone suggested she found the topic somewhat distasteful. It was, I said simply, unwilling to diminish my career to appease her. I'd learned long ago that Margaret Wilson, with her charity board memberships and country club lunches, viewed anyone in service positions as somehow beneath her. Vanessa returned with a glass of water, condensation already beading on its surface. Dinner should be ready in about 20 minutes, she announced. I'm trying a new roast recipe. It smells wonderful, I offered. Is there anything I can do to help? No need, she replied quickly. Everything's under control. The conversation resumed, flowing around me rather than including me. They discussed people I didn't know, events I hadn't attended, inside jokes I couldn't possibly understand. I sipped my water and nodded at appropriate intervals, studying the room instead. Family photos adorned the mantelpiece, Vanessa and Michael's wedding, vacations I hadn't known about, holidays spent with the Wilsons. None. With me. A particular frame caught my eye. Michael, with an elderly woman I didn't recognize, their arms around each other, both beaming at the camera. Who's that with you in that photo, Michael? I asked during a lull in conversation, pointing to the frame. The room went silent. Michael's eyes darted to Vanessa, who pressed her lips together. That's my grandmother, she said after a moment. Dad's mother. She passed last year. I'm sorry for your loss, I said automatically, though confusion swirled within me. Why would a photo of Michael with Vanessa's grandmother hold such prominence, while not a single image of him with me or Richard was visible? Edward cleared his throat. Mother adored Michael, said he was the grandson she always wanted. How nice, I managed, though the words stung. Had Michael been playing grandson to Vanessa's family while barely maintaining contact with his own mother? The grandfather clock chimed 7, and Vanessa stood. I should check on dinner. I'll help, Claire offered, following her sister from the room. Left with the men and Margaret, I attempted conversation again. So, Edward, are you still with the same law firm? Retired last year, he replied, though I still consult occasionally. Can't quite let go entirely. He chuckled, a sound echoed by Michael. Dad's been teaching me the finer points of golf, my son added. We play twice a week at his club. Twice a week? Michael had told me he was too busy to visit more than once every few months, citing work pressures and family obligations. Yet he found time for regular golf outings with his father-in-law? You've always enjoyed sports, I said, keeping my voice level. Your father would be pleased. At the mention of Richard, discomfort rippled through the room. Margaret suddenly became very interested in her manicure. Edward shifted in his seat. Michael's smile faltered. Yes. Well, he mumbled, then brightened artificially. Let me see if the ladies need any help. Left alone with Vanessa's parents, I searched for common ground. Your home in Princeton is lovely. I remember it from the rehearsal dinner. We've actually sold it, Margaret informed me. Downsized to a condo on the golf course, much less maintenance. I understand completely, I said. After Richard passed, the family home felt too empty, too full of ghosts. Margaret nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with my mention of death. Edward checked his watch. Salvation came in the form of Claire, who returned to announce dinner was served. I followed the Wilsons into the dining room, where a rectangular table had been set for 6. Vanessa was placing a large roast on a trivet, her face flushed from the kitchen heat. "This looks wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed by the spread. Besides the roast, there were roasted potatoes, asparagus, and a salad that appeared to contain cranberries and walnuts. "Thank you," Vanessa replied, not meeting my eyes. "Michael, would you pour the wine?" I moved toward what seemed to be an empty place setting, but Michael intercepted me with a strange expression, part embarrassment, part panic. "Mom," he said quietly, pulling me aside as the others took their seats. "There's been a slight issue." "What is it, dear?" I asked, my nurse's instinct for trouble kicking in. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit since boyhood. "Well, she's a bit upset that you came early. She wasn't quite ready." "I'm only 15 minutes early," I said, confusion mounting. "And I offered to help." Michael lowered his voice further. "That's not really it. The thing is," he swallowed hard, "Vanessa doesn't want you to join us at the table." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "My wife doesn't want you near the table," he repeated, his eyes anywhere but on mine. "She thinks it would be uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," I echoed, unable to process what I was hearing. "Michael, what are you saying?" He glanced toward the table where the others were already passing dishes, studiously ignoring our whispered exchange. "She's prepared a plate for you. In the kitchen. She thought it might be better if you ate there." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "You want me to eat in the kitchen? Alone? Like a servant?" "Mom, please," Michael pleaded, his voice strained. "Don't make this harder than it is. Vanessa's been stressed about this dinner for weeks. Her parents are only in town for 2 days. And I'm only your mother," I said, the words escaping before I could temper them with diplomacy. Michael's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "This is my house, Mom, and Vanessa is my wife. I need you to respect our wishes. Our wishes, not her wishes. Our wishes." My son had aligned himself completely with the woman who would banish his mother to the kitchen. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the conversation at the table flowed naturally, as if this humiliation wasn't unfolding mere feet away, as if I wasn't being erased from my own son's life before my very eyes. "I see," I finally managed, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "And if I refuse, if I insist on joining my son and his family for dinner, as invited?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Then I'd have to ask you to leave." My hand flew to my throat, finding the small gold locket Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary. Inside was a tiny photo of Michael as a baby. I'd worn it nearly every day since. "I changed your diapers," I whispered. "I held you through nightmares and fevers. I worked double shifts to put you through college when your father's business was struggling. And this is how you repay that love. By banishing me to the kitchen while you play happy families with people who've known you for 5 years?" "Mom," Michael hissed, glancing nervously toward the table. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" I asked, straightening my spine, dignity flooding back. "I don't believe I am. Making a scene would involve raising my voice, causing a disturbance. I'm simply stating facts." I took a step back, then another, creating distance between myself and this stranger wearing my son's face. "Enjoy your dinner, Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake inside me. "I won't trouble you or your wife by eating in the kitchen like an unwanted stray. I'll see myself out." I turned, head high, and walked through the living room toward the foyer. Behind me, I heard Edward ask, "Is everything all right?" and Michael's muffled response. In the foyer, I retrieved my coat from the hook, noting with detached interest that my hands were steady despite the roiling emotions within. I picked up the pie and wine I'd brought, gifts now unwanted, like their bearer. The front door opened easily, the spring air rushing in with the scent of cherry blossoms. I stepped outside, pulled the door closed behind me with a quiet click, and made my way to my car on legs that somehow still supported me. Only when I was safely inside the Camry, doors locked against the world, did I allow the first tear to fall. One tear, then another, then a flood breaking through a lifetime of carefully constructed dams. I sat there crying in the gathering dusk, an old woman cast aside by the person she loved most in the world, clutching a cooling pie and a bottle of wine too expensive for her budget. Through the windows of the house, I could see the dining room, the family gathered, heads bent toward one another in conversation, no empty chair to mark my absence. It wasn't until my tears had subsided into hiccuping breaths that I noticed a figure approaching the car. Claire, Vanessa's sister, her face pinched with concern. I rolled down the window a crack. "Mrs. Scott, Elaine," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were going to—" "That was horrible." I managed a watery smile. "Not your fault, dear." "I brought this," she said, pressing a folded napkin into my hand through the window. Inside was a dinner roll, still warm. Such a small kindness, yet it nearly undid me again. And I wanted to say, well, I just think you should know. This isn't right, what they're doing. "Thank you, Claire," I whispered. She glanced back at the house. "I should go back before they notice. But take my number, please." She recited it quickly, and I entered it into my phone with trembling fingers. "Call me if you need anything." With that, she hurried back to the house, a conspirator in a minor act of rebellion. I watched her go, this stranger who'd shown more compassion than my own flesh and blood. I started the car, the engine's rumble providing a counterpoint to the thoughts racing through my mind. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Eyes red-rimmed but dry now, chin lifted in defiance rather than defeat. "This isn't over, Michael," I said aloud to the empty car. "Not by a long shot. I may have been banished from the table tonight, but I was Elaine Scott, head nurse, wife of Richard, mother of Michael. I had survived worse than this, my husband's death, breast cancer at 50, a childhood of poverty. I would survive this too. And more than survive. I would reclaim my place, not at their table perhaps, but in this world, on my own terms." The tears had stopped completely now. In their place, something new had begun to bloom. A slow-burning determination that warmed me from within as I drove through the darkening streets toward home. I didn't call Claire that night, or the next day. Pride, perhaps, or the lingering shock of what had transpired at my son's dining table. Instead, I drove home to my apartment in Elizabeth, the homemade pie still intact on the passenger seat, a silent witness to my humiliation. My apartment building was nothing special, a red brick 4-story with decent security and mostly retired residents. After selling the family home in Cranford, I'd chosen it for its affordability and proximity to my volunteer work at the community center. Not glamorous, but it was mine, paid for in full, no mortgage to worry about in my retirement years. I parked in my designated spot, gathered my belongings, and made my way to the 3rd floor. Mrs. Abernathy from 3C was in the hallway, wrestling with her recycling. "Let me help you with that, Betty," I offered, setting down my purse and the pie to take the bin from her arthritic hands. "Elaine, you're a saint," she sighed with relief. "I thought you were having dinner with your son tonight." News traveled fast in a building full of retirees, with little to do but observe the comings and goings of their neighbors. "It ended early," I said, managing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Betty Abernathy had known me for 3 years, long enough to recognize the strain in my voice. She studied me with the shrewd gaze of a woman who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "Well, their loss is my gain," she declared. "I've got a pot of decaf and half a lemon cake that needs eating. Come over when you've settled." I nodded, grateful for the invitation, yet desperate for solitude. "Give me half an hour to change." In my apartment, I set the pie on the counter and placed the wine in the refrigerator. I changed out of my dinner clothes into comfortable slacks and a well-worn cardigan, removed my makeup, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed older than she had this morning, the lines around her mouth deeper, her eyes holding a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. "Enough," I told my reflection firmly. Self-pity had never been my style, Not when Richard was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, not when I'd found that lump in my breast all those years ago, and not now. I made my way to Betty's apartment, pie in hand. She welcomed me with a hug that smelled of lavender and Jean Naté bath splash, ushering me into her cluttered living room. Unlike my minimalist approach after downsizing, Betty had crammed her apartment with furniture, photographs, and mementos from her previous home. "So," she said once we were settled with coffee and dessert, "want to talk about it?" And surprisingly, I did. The story poured out of me. The invitation, the early arrival, Michael's terrible words. By the time I finished, Betty's face had transformed from concern to outrage. "He said what? My wife doesn't want you near the table?" She shook her head, silver curls bouncing with indignation. "I would have thrown that pie right in their faces." I managed a genuine laugh. I considered it, but I was raised better than that. "Sometimes better isn't better," Betty declared, topping off my coffee. "Sometimes better is just letting people walk all over you." Her words stung with truth. Had I been too accommodating? Too understanding of Michael's new life? His gradual distancing? Had my attempts to not be a burden backfired, making me so unobtrusive that I'd become invisible? "What are you going to do?" Betty asked, fork poised over her second slice of pie. "I don't know," I admitted. "Call him tomorrow, perhaps, when he's had time to reflect on his behavior." Betty snorted. "Men like that don't reflect, Elaine. They justify." We finished our impromptu gathering around 10, and I returned to my apartment with a lighter heart. Having shared my humiliation had somehow diluted its power. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message. "Unknown number. It's Claire, Vanessa's sister. Just checking that you got home okay. Again, I'm so sorry about tonight. I hadn't expected her to follow through." Saving her number, I typed a response. "Home safe. Thank you for your concern. You have nothing to apologize for. Claire, I feel responsible somehow. I should have said something at the table. And put yourself in an impossible position? No, you were kind to come out to my car. That meant a lot. Claire, I'm staying with them until Sunday. If you want to talk more, I can meet you somewhere." I hesitated. What would come of further contact with Claire? Yet something about her genuine concern drew me in. "There's a coffee shop called Mabel's on Elmora Avenue in Elizabeth. I'm usually there around 10 a.m. on Saturdays. Claire, I'll find it. See you tomorrow." Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams haunted by dining tables that stretched endlessly away from me, Michael's face distorting as he repeated those cutting words. I woke at dawn, my pillow damp with tears I didn't remember crying. After a light breakfast and my morning medications, I found myself restless, the apartment suddenly confining. It was only 7, 3 hours before I might see Claire at Mabel's. On impulse, I changed into walking shoes, grabbed a light jacket, and headed out. Elizabeth isn't known for its scenic beauty, but spring transforms even the most ordinary streets. I walked without purpose, letting my feet lead me through familiar neighborhoods. The exercise cleared my head, the rhythmic movement of my legs providing a meditation of sorts. By 9:30, I'd made my way to Mabel's, a cozy cafe tucked between a laundromat and a smartphone repair shop. Mabel herself, a robust woman in her 50s with a booming laugh, greeted me by name. "Early today, Elaine? The usual?" "Please," I nodded, settling into my preferred corner table. My usual was a medium coffee with room for cream and a cranberry scone. A Saturday indulgence I allowed myself despite the cost. I was halfway through both when the bell above the door jingled and Claire stepped in, glancing around uncertainly. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a Boston University sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Spotting me, she waved and approached after ordering at the counter. "Good morning," she said, sliding into the chair opposite me. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," I assured her. "I'm an early riser these days. One of the joys of aging, you need less sleep but take more naps." She laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "My grandmother used to say the same thing." An awkward silence fell between us, broken when the barista delivered Claire's latte. She wrapped her hands around the mug, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I want to explain something," she finally said. "About last night, about Vanessa." I raised a hand. "You don't need to defend your sister to me." "I'm not defending her," Claire said firmly. What she did was inexcusable, but I think you should know that this isn't new behavior for her. I frowned, stirring my coffee absently. What do you mean? Claire sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Vanessa has always been territorial, possessive. Growing up, if she decided something was hers, no one else could touch it, even people. And now my son is hers, I said quietly. Exactly. She systematically isolated him from anyone she perceives as competition for his attention or affection. Claire's voice held a bitter note. I've seen it happen with his college friends, his former co-workers, and now, you. The realization settled heavily in my chest. Has she always disliked me? It's not personal, Claire assured me. She'd do this with any mother-in-law. Our mother dominated our father completely, still does. Vanessa learned from the best. I considered this new information, trying to reconcile it with the polite, if distant woman I'd encountered at family functions. But why now? Why so blatantly? We've managed a civil relationship for 5 years. Claire hesitated, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. They're trying to have a baby, have been for about a year now. Vanessa's, well, it's not going as planned. She's become obsessive about controlling every aspect of their lives, convinced that any stress might be preventing conception. And I'm a source of stress? The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman trying to become a mother was rejecting her husband's mother. In her mind, yes. Claire shrugged apologetically. She's convinced that Michael's divided loyalties are causing him anxiety, which is affecting everything. I sipped my coffee, digesting this information. So she decided to force a choice, and Michael chose her. Claire's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Elaine. It's not fair. Life rarely is, I replied, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. Understanding Vanessa's motivations didn't excuse her behavior, or Michael's, but it provided context. Thank you for telling me this. There's more, Claire said, leaning forward. They've been seeing a fertility specialist. Yesterday, right before dinner, they got news that their latest round of tests showed no issues. The doctor suggested they try IVF. That's expensive, I murmured, thinking of Michael's middle management salary and the mortgage on that colonial house. Very, and not fully covered by insurance. Claire tapped her fingers against her mug. That's why Edward and Margaret were there last night. They're offering to pay for the treatments. The pieces clicked into place. And my presence complicated things. Claire nodded. Vanessa didn't want anything to distract from securing that financial commitment. She was furious when you arrived early. They were still discussing details. Money with strings attached, I guessed, familiar with Margaret Wilson's manipulative tendencies. A trust fund for the baby, controlled by my parents until the child turns 25, Claire confirmed, and naming rights. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, incredulous sound. Naming rights? Like a sports stadium? First and middle names of their choosing, Claire said, not sharing my amusement. It's outrageous, but Vanessa's considering it. The fertility treatments alone will cost over $20,000 per cycle. I shook my head, thinking of the modest savings I'd set aside for my grandchildren, should they ever exist. Nothing close to what the Wilsons could offer, but given with no conditions beyond love. Does Michael know you're meeting me? I asked suddenly. Claire shook her head. I told them I was going for a run, then meeting a former classmate who lives in the area. She checked her watch. I should head back soon. They're planning to visit the fertility clinic together this afternoon. I appreciate you taking the risk, I said sincerely. It can't be easy, caught between loyalty to your sister and whatever this is. Basic human decency? Claire suggested with a wry smile. I've always been the family disappointment. Might as well embrace the role. I studied her face, seeing kindness there and something else, a familiar loneliness perhaps. You said you're visiting from Boston? Yes, I'm based at Mass General. Finished my fellowship last year. Do you have family there? A partner? A shadow crossed her face. Not anymore. My ex-wife and I separated 6 months ago. She got the apartment and most of our friends in the divorce. I'm sorry, I said, understanding better her empathy for my situation. Claire, too, knew what it was to be suddenly alone. It's for the best, she said with forced brightness. Gives me more time to focus on my research. We chatted a while longer about her work with Parkinson's patients, finding common ground in medical discussions. As 11:30 approached, Claire reluctantly gathered her things. I should go. They'll wonder where I am. I nodded, feeling an unexpected connection with this young woman. Will you be in touch? If that's okay, she said, seeming genuinely pleased by the prospect. I'm back in Boston on Monday, but maybe we could text sometimes. I'd like that, I replied honestly. After Claire left, I remained at the table, ordering a second coffee and thinking. The morning's revelations had shifted something inside me. The hurt remained, but alongside it grew a new emotion: determination. If Michael and Vanessa were planning a family, my potential grandchildren deserved to know their grandmother. The Wilsons might have money and influence, but I had something they couldn't buy: genuine love, unconditional and boundless. I wouldn't fight Vanessa on her own terms. I wouldn't plead with Michael or make demands, but neither would I fade quietly into the background of their lives, an inconvenient relation to be tolerated at best, excluded at worst. My phone buzzed with a text from Betty. Lunch at my place? Made too much potato salad again. I smiled, texting back a quick acceptance. Then, on impulse, I opened my contacts and called a number I hadn't used in months. Sarah, it's Elaine Scott. Yes, it's been too long. I'm calling about that position on the hospital auxiliary board. Is it still available? Wonderful. I'd like to apply. As I gathered my things to leave, Mabel approached with a paper bag. Made too many muffins today. Take some for later? I accepted with thanks, touched by her kindness. Walking home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Michael's rejection had cracked something open inside me, not just pain, but possibility. For too long, I'd defined myself primarily as Richard's wife, Michael's mother. With Richard gone and Michael choosing distance, perhaps it was time to rediscover Elaine Scott, to rebuild a life centered on my own needs and desires rather than orbiting around my family. By the time I reached my apartment building, I'd made a mental list of actions to take: updating my resume for the hospital board, looking into that photography class at the community center, calling my old nursing colleagues for lunch. Betty was waiting in the lobby, a knowing gleam in her eye. You look different today. Better. I feel different, I admitted. Like I've been asleep for a long time, and I'm finally waking up. About damn time, she declared, linking her arm through mine as we headed for the elevator. Now tell me all about your coffee date. That young lady looked like she had some interesting things to say. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I realized I hadn't thought about Michael's cruel words for at least an hour. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The first step on a new path, one I would walk with my head held high, whether my son chose to join me or not. 3 weeks passed without a word from Michael. I won't pretend his silence didn't hurt. It did. A persistent ache beneath my breastbone that flared whenever I passed the framed photo of him on my bookshelf. But life has a way of continuing, with or without our permission, and mine was suddenly fuller than it had been in years. The hospital auxiliary board position came through. It wasn't paid work, but it connected me back to the medical world I'd inhabited for 3.5 decades. Twice a week, I donned a blue volunteer jacket and helped coordinate the army of volunteers who kept Elizabeth General running smoothly, delivering flowers, escorting patients, staffing the gift shop. Small tasks that made the sterile hospital environment more human. On Mondays, I attended a beginner's photography class at the community center, learning to use the digital camera I'd bought myself as a retirement gift but had barely touched. Our instructor, Paolo, a retired photojournalist with a E, salt and pepper beard and endless patience, encouraged us to capture the overlooked moments in our daily lives. Beauty exists in the mundane, he told us, displaying his own photographs of rain puddles reflecting neon signs, steam rising from manhole covers, and elderly couples' intertwined hands on a park bench. Your assignment this week: find 3 ordinary things that tell a story without words. I found myself seeing my neighborhood with new eyes, noticing details I'd walked past 100 times without registering. The way morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Joseph's Church, casting jewel-toned patterns on the sidewalk. The intricate graffiti art beneath the railway overpass. the proud determination in Mrs. Abernathy's posture as she carefully navigated the 4 steps to our building's entrance with her walker. My photographs were amateurish but earnest. Paolo praised my natural eye for composition, while gently suggesting technical improvements. For the first time in decades, I was a beginner at something, fumbling and learning and improving through practice rather than expertise. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Through it all, Claire kept in touch with sporadic texts, updates about an interesting case at the hospital, a question about a nursing technique she was researching, photos of Boston in late spring. I responded with my own amateur photographs, anecdotes from the auxiliary board, recommendations for medical journals I'd found useful during my career. It wasn't the relationship I'd expected to develop from that disastrous dinner, but it filled some of the emptiness left by Michael's absence. Claire was intelligent, compassionate, and surprisingly funny in her dry, understated way. Our conversations never directly mentioned Michael or Vanessa, as if by mutual agreement we'd established a space free from family complications. That changed on a rainy Tuesday in late May. I was sorting donations for the hospital thrift shop when my phone buzzed with Claire's name. "Can you talk? It's about Michael." My heart leapt to my throat. Had something happened to my son? An accident? Illness? I stepped outside to the covered portico, punching the call button with trembling fingers. "Claire? What's wrong? Is Michael okay?" "He's fine physically," she assured me quickly. "I'm sorry to worry you. It's just, I thought you should know. Vanessa is pregnant." The world tilted momentarily. I gripped the concrete pillar beside me, steadying myself against the rush of conflicting emotions, joy, hurt, anger, longing. "The IVF worked then," I managed after a moment. "That was fast." "That's the thing," Claire said, her voice lowered as if afraid of being overheard. "It wasn't IVF. It happened naturally, right after my visit. They found out last week." "I see." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. "And Michael didn't think to tell me himself." "He wanted to," Claire said, though her tone held doubt. "Vanessa convinced him to wait until after the first trimester. She's only about 6 weeks along." "Then how do you know?" "Mom called me, gloating about her future grandchild." The bitterness in Claire's voice was unmistakable. "Apparently they've already agreed to name the baby Edward if it's a boy, Margaret if it's a girl." Of course they had. The Wilsons' naming rights, secured despite the natural conception, rendering their financial assistance unnecessary. I closed my eyes against a fresh wave of pain. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "I appreciate knowing." "I'm sorry, Elaine. I thought it would be worse for you to find out months from now, or from someone else." "You were right." I watched raindrops splatter against the pavement, creating temporary constellations that vanished as quickly as they formed. "How are they?" "Happy, I assume." "Ecstatic and terrified. Mostly Vanessa. She's convinced something will go wrong. She's got Michael running around getting organic everything, installing air purifiers, reading every pregnancy book ever written." Despite everything, a smile tugged at my lips. He was the same as a child, always wanted to be prepared for every contingency. He had the most elaborate emergency kit in his treehouse: bandages, flashlight, canned beans, even a survival manual he special ordered with his allowance. Claire laughed softly. "That sounds like him." A thought occurred to me, sharp and painful. Will they tell me eventually? Or am I to be permanently excommunicated from their lives? And my grandchild's? Claire hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Vanessa's anxiety about the pregnancy has made her more controlling than ever. And Michael, he's completely focused on her, on being the perfect expectant father, at the expense of being a son," I murmured. More to myself than to Claire. "I'm sorry," she said again, helplessness in her voice. "Don't be. It's not your burden to carry." I straightened my shoulders, decision crystallizing. "Thank you for calling, Claire. I need to get back to work now." After we disconnected, I stood watching the rain for several long minutes, processing. My first grandchild was growing inside Vanessa, a tiny cluster of cells with Michael's DNA and mine. A life I might never be allowed to know. The unfairness of it struck me with physical force. What had I done to deserve such complete rejection? Been too supportive? Too understanding of Michael's busy schedule? Too careful not to impose on his new life? I returned to the thrift shop in a daze, mechanically continuing my sorting until my shift ended. The rain had stopped by then, leaving the streets gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Instead of taking the bus home, I walked, needing the physical exertion to clear my head. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made a decision. I would not allow Michael and Vanessa to simply erase me from their child's life without at least attempting to claim my place. Not with confrontation or demands, but with a gesture that might open a door. I spent the evening selecting photographs, Michael as a newborn in my arms, his first steps, Richard teaching him to ride a bike, his high school graduation, the three of us at his college commencement. I wrote brief notes on the back of each, simple facts about the moments captured. For the graduation photo, you insisted on wearing your father's tie even though it hung to your knees. He was so proud. The next morning, I took the bus to a framing shop in a nicer part of town, selecting a simple silver frame for the newborn photo. Back home, I composed a letter, not of recrimination or hurt, but of hope and love. Dear Michael and Vanessa, Claire shared your wonderful news. A child is life's greatest blessing, and I'm genuinely happy for you both. I've enclosed a few photographs that might someday help your little one understand where they come from, the history written in their DNA. There are more when and if you want them. I understand that you're building your own family now with its own traditions and boundaries. I respect that. But I also want you to know that my door is always open, my heart always ready to welcome you, all of you, whenever you might wish to enter. With love and hope. Mom. I mailed the package on Thursday morning, then tried to put it from my mind. What happened next was beyond my control. I'd extended a hand. It was up to Michael whether to take it. The weekend arrived with no response as expected. Too soon, I told myself. Give them time to receive it, to discuss it, to decide. On Saturday morning, I met Betty and two other women from our building for our now regular breakfast at Mabel's. The conversation flowed easily around me. Complaints about the building's maintenance man, recommendations for summer reading, debates about the merits of various grocery delivery services. Normal, everyday concerns of women in their 60s and 70s, navigating a world that increasingly seemed designed for younger, more tech-savvy generations. Elaine, you haven't touched your scone, Betty observed, interrupting my wandering thoughts. Everything okay? Just distracted, I assured her, taking a deliberate bite of the pastry. Got some news about Michael this week. He and Vanessa are expecting. The table fell silent. They all knew about the dinner incident. Betty had made sure of that, enlisting their support in what she called Operation Uplift Elaine. Well, said Marge, a retired librarian with a pragmatic outlook, that changes things. Does it? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Grandchildren have a way of softening even the hardest hearts, she said confidently. My daughter-in-law and I couldn't stand each other until little Emma came along. Now we're thick as thieves. Vanessa isn't your daughter-in-law, Betty pointed out with her characteristic bluntness. She's a special kind of difficult. Still, Marge insisted, babies have a way of reshuffling priorities. You'll see. I wasn't so sure, but I appreciated her optimism. After breakfast, instead of heading home, I took my camera and walked to the nearby park. Paolo had emphasized the importance of practice, and the morning light was perfect for capturing the vibrant spring colors. I was photographing a particularly striking purple coneflower when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, reluctant to interrupt my peaceful morning with likely spam, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? Mrs. Scott? Elaine? A man's voice, vaguely. Familiar. Yes, this is Elaine. It's Edward Wilson, Vanessa's father. My finger hovered over the disconnect button. What could Edward possibly want with me? I hope I'm not disturbing you, he continued when I remained silent. I got your number from the package you sent Michael. The package, I repeated, my heart sinking. Had my peace offering caused offense? Was Edward calling to reprimand me for overstepping? Yes, the photographs. His voice softened slightly. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? I echoed, thoroughly confused now. For your generosity of spirit, he said, and to apologize for what happened at dinner. It was inexcusable. I sank onto a nearby bench, stunned by this unexpected development. I appreciate that, Edward. But why are you calling? Not Michael. He sighed heavily. Michael doesn't know I'm calling. Neither does Vanessa. He paused. Things are complicated at the moment. Vanessa's pregnancy has been difficult. Severe morning sickness, anxiety. The doctor has advised minimal stress. And I'm considered a stress factor, I concluded. Currently, yes. His honesty was surprising, but not unwelcome. Vanessa has issues with maternal figures. Her relationship with Margaret has always been strained, though they present a united front to the world. This aligned with what Claire had told me. I see. No, I don't think you do, Edward said, an unexpected edge to his voice. Margaret can be controlling. She has certain expectations for our daughters, for our family's public image. Vanessa has spent her life trying to meet those expectations, often at great personal cost. I remained silent, sensing he had more to say. When Vanessa met Michael, Margaret didn't approve. He wasn't from the right background, didn't have the right connections. But Vanessa stood her ground for once, chose her own path. It was the first real independence she'd shown. So why is she so determined to exclude me? I asked, genuinely perplexed. I've never tried to control Michael's life or impose on their marriage. Because you represent something she both envies and fears, Edward said quietly. A mother who loves unconditionally, who doesn't see her child as an extension of herself or a project to be managed. Margaret has monitored and directed every aspect of our daughters' lives, from their education to their careers to their choice of partners. With the exception of Michael, I noted. Yes. And now Vanessa fears losing control of her own family unit. Your presence reminds her of what she never had and what she doesn't know how to give. The insight was unexpected from Edward, who had always struck me as somewhat detached, deferring to Margaret in family matters. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I saw the photographs you sent, saw the love in them, the history. His voice roughened. My grandchild deserves to know that history, deserves to know you. But right now, pushing would only strengthen Vanessa's resistance. What are you suggesting? Patience, he said simply. And perhaps an ally. You? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. I'm not as oblivious as I may seem, Elaine, nor as content with Margaret's dominance as she believes. There was a wry humor in his tone now. I've spent 40 years in a marriage where peace was purchased at the price of acquiescence. I don't want that for Michael, or for my grandchild. What about what Vanessa wants? What Vanessa needs and what she thinks she wants are often at odds, he said. Give me time to work on this, Elaine. Don't give up on them. After we disconnected, I sat on the bench for a long time, turning the conversation over in my mind. Edward Wilson, unexpected ally. The family dynamics were more complex than I'd realized, fracture lines running beneath the polished surface I'd glimpsed at holidays and formal occasions. I raised my camera, focusing on a nearby oak tree, ancient, gnarled, roots visibly pushing up through the soil in places, but still standing strong. It seemed an appropriate metaphor for family. Messy, imperfect, sometimes damaged, yet enduring. As I captured the image, a notification appeared on my phone. A text from Claire. Mom just called. She and Dad are coming to Boston next weekend. Apparently, there's some important family business to discuss. Any idea what that's about? I smiled to myself, typing back, I might have a theory or two. Let's talk tomorrow. For the first time since that devastating dinner, I felt something like hope. Not the desperate kind that leads to disappointment, but the quieter, more resilient sort that acknowledges difficulties while believing in possibilities. My grandchild might not bear my name, might grow up calling Margaret grandmother while I remained Elaine. But names were just labels. Love was what mattered. And love, I was discovering, could find unexpected paths forward, even when the most obvious routes were blocked. Summer arrived with unprecedented heat, the kind that turned Elizabeth's concrete and asphalt into a shimmering mirage by mid-morning. The community center installed extra fans in our photography classroom, but they mostly just circulated the hot air. Still, I attended every session, my skills improving enough that Paolo suggested I consider entering some pieces in the county fair's amateur competition. Your Urban Textures series shows remarkable sensitivity, he told me, examining my photographs of weathered brick walls, rusted fire escapes, and cracked sidewalks reclaimed by stubborn weeds. Particularly this one. He held up my favorite, a close-up of an elderly man's hands gripping a chess piece in the park, liver spots and prominent veins telling a story of time's passage against the weathered marble of the bishop he clutched. You've captured dignity in aging, Paolo said, something our youth-obsessed culture desperately needs to see. I submitted 3 photographs to the fair committee, more to please Paolo than from any expectation of recognition. Meanwhile, my hospital volunteer work expanded to include mentoring nursing students during their clinical rotations. Sharing the practical wisdom I'd accumulated over decades brought unexpected satisfaction, reminding me that my value didn't end with retirement. Through it all, the situation with Michael remained unresolved. Edward had been true to his word, calling every couple of weeks with updates on Vanessa's pregnancy and subtle hints about his ongoing efforts to facilitate reconciliation. Vanessa had passed the first trimester mark, the morning sickness easing though not disappearing entirely. The baby, a boy, they'd learned, was developing normally. They've started discussing names, Edward mentioned during one call in late June. Edward Michael is Vanessa's preference, naturally. Naturally, I echoed, keeping my tone neutral, though my heart ached at the thought of my grandson bearing the Wilson name while having no connection to me or to Richard. Michael suggested Richard as a middle name, Edward added, a note of triumph in his voice. Vanessa hasn't dismissed it outright. A small victory, perhaps, but significant. My son hadn't forgotten his father, hadn't completely discarded his roots. Claire visited Elizabeth twice during those summer months, ostensibly, to attend medical conferences in nearby Newark, though she always made time for coffee at Mabel's. During her second visit, in early July, she brought news that simultaneously lifted my spirits and underscored my continued exclusion. They've started the nursery, she told me, showing photos on her phone, a room with pale blue walls, white furniture, and a border of sailboats near the ceiling. Michael's doing most of the work himself. He's become quite the handyman. I smiled. At this revelation, Richard had been hopeless with tools, hiring professionals for the simplest home repairs. Michael, it seemed, had developed skills his father never possessed. It looks lovely, I said, genuinely meaning it, despite the pang of knowing I might never see this room in person, never rock my grandson to sleep within those blue walls. Claire hesitated, then swiped to another photo, Michael standing on a ladder, paintbrush in hand, focused on his task. I thought you might want to see him, she said softly. He looks well, doesn't he? He did. Tanned from outdoor work, perhaps a bit thinner, but his expression showed a contentment I hadn't seen in years. Impending fatherhood suited him. Thank you, I whispered, fighting unexpected tears, for not pretending he doesn't exist when we talk. Claire reached across the table, squeezing my hand. He asks about you, you know, when Vanessa isn't around. This surprised me. What does he ask? How you seem, what you're doing, if you're angry with him. She shrugged. I tell him you're thriving, busy with your volunteer work and photography. I don't mention our meeting specifically. It seems simpler that way. And does he say anything else? About why he hasn't contacted me himself? Claire sighed, releasing my hand to stir her coffee. He makes excuses. Vanessa's health, work stress, nursery preparations. But I think the truth is simpler. He's a coward about this particular conflict. The assessment was harsh, but not inaccurate. Michael had always avoided confrontation, preferring to smooth things over or retreat entirely rather than face uncomfortable conversations. As a child, he'd hide in his room during Richard's and my rare arguments, emerging only when voices returned to normal volumes, offering drawings or small treasures as peace offerings. I don't need him to be brave, I said after a moment. I just need him to be present, in some form, in any form. I know, Claire replied, and I think, deep down, he knows that too. The following week brought an unexpected development. My photograph, the chess player's hands, won second place in the county fair's human experience category. The local newspaper ran a small piece about the community center's arts program, featuring several winners, including myself. Nothing major, just a paragraph and a thumbnail of my photograph, but Paolo was ecstatic, cutting out the article and framing it for our classroom. "Your first published work," he declared. "We'll make a professional of you yet, Elaine." I laughed off his enthusiasm, but secretly kept 2 copies of the article, one for my refrigerator, one tucked away in my growing collection of items for my grandson's future. A scrapbook of sorts, chronicling not just my life, but the family history that was his birthright, whether Vanessa approved or not. August arrived with suffocating humidity and the promise of my birthday on the 15th, 69, a peculiar age that felt neither particularly significant nor entirely mundane. Betty organized a small gathering in the building's community room, inviting my breakfast club friends, several hospital volunteers, and Paolo. Claire sent regrets from Boston, along with a beautiful leather-bound photo album and a handwritten note promising to visit in September. I expected nothing from Michael, having received only a text message on my birthday the previous year. When the doorbell rang that morning, I assumed it was Betty, arriving early to help with preparations for the evening celebration. Instead, I opened my door to find a delivery man holding an enormous arrangement of pink and white lilies, my favorites, though I couldn't recall mentioning that to anyone. Recently. "Elaine Scott?" he confirmed, passing me the fragrant bouquet. "Yes, thank you." I searched for a card as he retreated, finding a small envelope nestled among the blooms. Inside was a simple message in familiar handwriting. "Happy birthday, Mom. I miss you. Love, Michael." Just that. No mention of Vanessa, no invitation to reconnect, no apology for months of silence. Yet those 7 words cracked something open inside me. Hope and hurt in equal measure. The recognition that he still considered himself my son despite everything. I placed the flowers on my dining table, the sweet scent filling my small apartment. All day, as I prepared for the evening celebration, I found myself returning to them, touching the velvet petals, rereading the brief message as if additional words might materialize with enough scrutiny. The birthday gathering was lovely, intimate and warm, filled with people who'd become important parts of my life over recent months. Betty had arranged for Mabel to cater, providing coffee and an assortment of pastries including my favorite cranberry scones. Paolo presented me with a framed print of his own work, a stunning black and white photograph of the Elizabeth waterfront at dawn, the industrial landscape transformed into something almost mystical by his skilled eye. "For inspiration," he said, kissing my cheek in the European manner. "And perhaps as a reminder that beauty exists even in unexpected places." I was describing my latest hospital project to Marge when Betty appeared at my elbow, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "You have visitors," she murmured. "In the lobby. I told them I'd check if you were receiving." "Visitors? Who?" But understanding dawned before I finished the question. "Michael?" Betty nodded, her protective instinct evident in her furrowed brow. "And the wife. Do you want me to send them away? Say you're too busy with your real friends?" I laughed, despite my suddenly racing heart. "No, Betty, please ask them to come up." "You're sure? After what they did?" "I'm sure." I squeezed her hand. "Whatever their reason for coming, I want to hear it." Betty departed with obvious reluctance, leaving me to smooth my dress and touch my hair, ridiculously concerned with my appearance, as if I were the one who had behaved badly. Around me the party continued, my friends tactfully pretending not to notice my distraction. When the door opened again, conversation faltered as Betty ushered in Michael and Vanessa. My son looked much as he had in Claire's photograph, though more nervous, one hand firmly grasping his wife's. Vanessa's pregnancy was obvious now, her floral maternity dress emphasizing rather than concealing her condition. Her face was fuller than I remembered, her eyes downcast. "Mom," Michael said, his voice catching slightly. "Happy birthday." "Thank you for coming," I replied, crossing the room to them. "And for the flowers. They're beautiful." An awkward silence fell, broken by Betty announcing loudly, "Who needs cake? I'm cutting the cake now," effectively drawing attention away from our reunion. "Can we talk privately?" Michael asked, glancing around at the curious faces. "Of course." I led them through the community room to a small terrace overlooking the building's modest garden. The evening air was still warm but less oppressive than the day had been, the first hints of relief from summer's grip. Once outside, Michael released Vanessa's hand, stepping forward to embrace me properly for the first time in months. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my hair. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I held him tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of him, laundry detergent and the faint spice of the cologne Richard had always worn, passed down from father to son. When we separated, both our eyes were damp. "The flowers are from both of us," Vanessa said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I remembered you mentioning lilies at our wedding." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched that she'd recalled such a detail. "They're perfect." Another silence descended, heavier with all that remained unsaid. "You're looking well," I offered. "How are you feeling?" Vanessa's hand moved protectively to her rounded abdomen. "Better now. The first few months were challenging. Claire mentioned you had severe morning sickness. That can be difficult." I kept my tone neutral, giving no indication of how much I knew about their lives through my regular contact with Claire. "It was pretty bad," Michael confirmed. "We were worried about the baby for a while, but everything's fine now. He's right on track, growing strong." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. Vanessa cleared her throat. "Mrs. Scott, Elaine, I owe you an apology. What happened at dinner, it was inexcusable." The acknowledgement surprised me, though I noted she didn't specify exactly what she was apologizing for. "A lot was happening that day," I said carefully. "I understand there were circumstances I wasn't aware of." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Has Claire been talking to you?" "Vanessa," Michael warned quietly. She pressed her lips together, then visibly collected herself. "Sorry. Hormones make everything more intense. What I'm trying to say is, I handled things badly. My anxiety about the pregnancy, about becoming a mother, I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." It wasn't a complete apology, skirting the edges of true accountability, but it was more than I'd expected. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means a lot to me." Michael stepped forward again, taking my hands in his. "We've been talking, Mom, about family, about what we want for our son, and we realized we don't want him growing up without knowing his grandmother." Hope bloomed in my chest, though I tempered it with caution. "I want that too, very much." "We'd like you to be part of his life," Michael continued. "Not just occasionally, but regularly. Sunday dinners, maybe, if you'd be willing." "I'd like nothing better," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Vanessa stepped closer, still maintaining a careful distance. "There's something else. We've been discussing names." "Edward Richard," Michael said, watching my face closely. "To honor both grandfathers." Tears sprang to my eyes unbidden. "Your father would be so proud," I whispered. "And," Vanessa added, somewhat reluctantly, "we were thinking for his middle name, Scott." "Edward Richard Scott," I repeated, testing the sound of it. "My grandson would carry our family name after all, not as his surname, but preserved nonetheless. It's important to us that he knows where he comes from," Michael said. "All sides of his heritage." I wondered how the Wilsons felt about this compromise, whether Edward had advocated for it as part of his promised intervention. But those questions could wait. For now, this olive branch, this acknowledgement of our family's place in the baby's life, was enough. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than I can express." We rejoined the party, Michael and Vanessa staying for cake and accepting introductions to my friends with reasonable grace. Betty watched them like a hawk, clearly ready to intervene at the first sign of distress on my part, but gradually relaxed as the evening progressed without incident. As they prepared to leave, Michael pulled me aside. "I have something else for you," he said, pressing a small package into my hand. "Open it later, when you're alone." After they departed and the last guests had gone, I sat on my sofa and carefully unwrapped the gift, a small, velvet-covered box containing a silver charm bracelet. A single charm hung from it, a miniature camera. Attached was a note. "Claire told me about your photography. I'd love to see your work sometime. Each birthday and Christmas, I'll add another charm to mark your new adventures. It's never too late to start a new chapter. I love you, Mom. Kay." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, the silver cool against my skin, the tiny camera catching the lamplight. It wasn't a complete resolution. There would be adjustments, boundaries to navigate, lingering tensions with Vanessa to address. The road ahead would have its bumps and detours. But as I moved around my apartment, turning off lights and preparing for bed, I felt a sense of rightness, of pieces shifting back into alignment. Not the same configuration as before. Life never allows that, but a new arrangement with space for growth and healing. On my nightstand sat the framed photograph of Richard holding newborn Michael, my favorite among all our family pictures. Soon, God willing, I would have a new photo to place beside it. Myself holding Edward Richard Scott, the next generation, the continuation of our family story. "We did okay, Richard," I whispered to the photograph. "Not perfect, but okay." Outside, a summer storm was brewing, lightning illuminating the night sky in brief, brilliant flashes. I stood at my bedroom window watching it approach, unafraid of its power. Like the storm, life brought darkness and light in equal measure, devastating losses alongside unexpected joys, painful rejections, followed by sweet reconciliations. The important thing, I was learning at 69, was to remain standing through it all, to bend without breaking, to understand that even when you're pushed away from the table, there are other tables, other chairs, other people willing to make space for you. And sometimes, if you're patient and fortunate, those who once excluded you might find their way back, bringing with them the possibility of new beginnings, not erasing the past hurt, but building something different and potentially beautiful alongside it. I touched the silver camera charm once more before turning out the light. Tomorrow would bring hospital rounds, photography class, perhaps a call from Claire. Small pleasures, meaningful work, genuine connections. A life reclaimed and rebuilt, not around my identity as Michael's mother, but around who I was becoming in my own right. Elaine Scott, photographer, mentor, friend, and soon, grandmother. Not defined by others' perceptions or limitations, but by my own resilient heart and the choices I made each day to move forward with dignity and hope. The first raindrops struck my window, a gentle percussion heralding the storm's arrival. I closed my eyes, ready for whatever weather tomorrow might bring. If my story of resilience and family healing touched your heart, please subscribe to see more journeys like mine. Leave a comment sharing how you've overcome rejection in your own life. We heal better together.